Hi, I recently released an unrelated video where I briefly went off on a tangent about Joe Rogan. And this particular researcher, I promise this is related to what we're going to be talking about. This particular researcher likes to have it known that he is the most published researcher in his field. And I decided to do a little bit of digging. And I may actually make a particular video on this because this is an important principle for people to learn. And it got me thinking that I should individualize this for you because this point is important for you to hear, something everyone else is missing about one of his guests. You've likely heard the controversy surrounding the incredibly popular podcaster Joe Rogan that's centered primarily around certain guests that have appeared on the podcast and made quite a stir with their claims related to COVID. So I'd like to speak to a giant hidden potential problem with one of the guests he brought on, Dr. Peter McCullough. From the outset, I'd like for you to know that I absolutely love the Joe Rogan podcast. I do believe that Joe is a kind, genuine person that is exceptional at interviewing individuals in a conversational manner. Some of that fandom might be illustrated in this shirt that I'm wearing. You'll understand the reference if you're a JRE fan. But that said, Joe does make mistakes, and I haven't agreed with him on everything or every one of his guests' points, especially and primarily in a field that I know quite well, medical research. And to that point, when I began listening to Dr. McCullough speak, it's almost as if intuition kicked in, and I had to do some digging when I heard him say that he's the most published researcher in his field.
Well, first of all, if you would please just state your credentials and tell everybody what you do.
I'm Dr. Peter McCullough. I'm an internist and cardiologist. I'm also trained in epidemiology. I'm in academic practice in Dallas, Texas. So I see patients about half the time. I saw patients yesterday. I drove down today to see you here in the studio. And the rest of my time I spend as an author, an editor. I'm an editor of a major journal in cardiovascular medicine, the former editor of an international journal. I'm the president of a major medical society right now, currently, about 5 years into that position. And, I frequently publish. I'm in my field, I study the interface between heart and kidney disease. I'm the most published person in my field in history. I have over 650 publications in the National Library of Medicine. I imagine that's probably ahead of anybody you've had on the show. They mentioned Paul Merrick. I'm just ahead of Paul Merrick. Pierre Corey mentioned him in critical care. I'm just ahead of Paul, a lot younger than he is.
So that part may be true, but if Joe had been more equipped for the interview, he would have pressed Dr. McCullough for further details on this point alone. The issue isn't that Dr. McCullough is a cardiologist, meaning his practice is in the heart, not infectious disease, because I do feel a doctor can be well educated in multiple subfields. But the brazen nature by which people announce the fact that he's the most published researcher, because a close look offers some clues that might have you rethinking that importance. If you look at Dr. McCullough's research, you'll find two worrisome points. One, he tends to publish in low-impact journals. Now, that means that the journals are less often to be the best quality, implying the peer review may be more lax. However, that isn't necessarily an issue so long as the research is well conducted. I'm not here to speak to the quality of the research. It may very well be perfectly fine. However, the second point is one that should have been mentioned. Dr. McCullough is the chief editor of at least one of the journals that he publishes in. Beyond that, he's also an executive editor in another journal that he publishes in, as well as an editor in another. So I stopped looking after a small while, so there may be more instances. Now, what does that mean? Well, an editor determines the peer review process, meaning that they select the peer reviewers of the papers, as well as oversee the peer review process to make sure that it's fair. The peer reviewers are usually, but not always, anonymous, so they can be as harsh as they need to be when evaluating research before it is accepted for publication, all under the watchful eye of the editor, who does have some power to allow or disallow research being published. I am not saying that Dr. McCullough was the editor for his own studies, but having any influence on the process or potential influence on the process is something Joe should know, and by extension, something that you should know. If I were an editor of a journal, I would never apply to have my study published in that journal. It might happen and everything might be above board, but it hits too close to home. And I can't imagine reviewers feeling completely without pressure knowing that they're reviewing a paper of the executive editor, for example, even if that editor is not directly overseeing this particular process. This is, of course, just my opinion, but regardless, the number of publications a person has is not the only metric of their esteem as a researcher. The quality and impartiality of that research is also critical. I'd even argue it's even more important. So, this is not saying Dr. McCullough isn't above board or that his research isn't quality. It very well might be. But let's not get wrapped up in the glitz and glamour of being the most published researcher and actually evaluate the research quality over the numbers. Until next time.